Hello YouTube artists, I'm Kelly Hernig and welcome to In the Studio. Last week I talked about ordinary things, like an envelope and a stamp. This week I want to show you how to paint it, but yet make it your own. So these are the two examples. I've got a little envelope piece with a stamp, bunch of postmarks. You can see it's aged, but it's still very white. So see it next to the white paper. And then I've got a flower here. I love this flower because of its crooked stem. Of course I would, right? I like things that are broken or twisted, remember? So this here is what I'm going to be doing. I've got three examples. I've got one traced here, one traced here, and one traced here. This one over here is going to have the flower just so that I can show you and talk to you a little bit more about shadows. But what I want you to think of is this is an envelope. Envelopes come in any color. I want you to think about that. When you go to get a card for any occasion, what kind of envelopes do you find? Pastel ones, bright ones, dark ones, dull ones, shiny ones, some with graphics on it, some plain. So do not limit yourself to just a white one. However, I use white a lot in vintage things. So I'm going to show you how I do a white one up here. I'm going to show you how I would do one. Think about the vintage color of like old paper. And then this one, I'm either going to do pink or blue. I haven't decided yet. But we're going to have fun and we're going to paint a bunch of them at one time so that I can move along as they're drying. That way you're not sitting here watching me do this from start to finish, this one and so on. So let's go have some fun. I will be using my 2025 palette and there is a whole video on it. Just search for Studio Palette 2025 on my channel and you'll see it. And then I'm also going to be using my Princeton Long Round Aqua Elite, the number 8. It's my favorite. I am losing my point, but it still has a pretty good point for this painting. It's going to be fine. I've drawn them all with pencil, but I've erased them with a kneaded eraser. And let's get started. This one I know I want to do as white as I can. So I have the color French Gray on my palette, which is a very light gray. I am going to avoid the stamp there. So I'm just going to add some more water here. I want it to be fairly light. So here's my stamp is. Notice that I didn't start at the edge. I put my main spot of color in the middle here. I like to do that because it gives me a nicer value on the edges, because I can come in with just water and kind of dirty it up along the edges without taking a lot of paint with me. And I like to do that just because it adds a little bit of interest. If it's all painted the same color, especially when doing just a little piece like this, just a little portion of an envelope, I don't want it to be filled solid. I want it to have some variation. Okay, let's see here. That looks pretty good. Remember, watercolor dries a little lighter. Okay. I'm gonna splash. I'm splashing for texture because remember, I like my pieces to look vintage, but it also gives it a value right away that I didn't have to do. While it's wet though, I am going to add a little bit of my French Gray and my Van Dyke Brown. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading here around the stamp. Touch in a little bit of water. I don't want that so harsh. So I'm just going to soften the edge here. Where the folds are, I like them to have a little bit of value as well. Just think of an envelope that's been folded and refolded. And then I'm just going to drop in some color. And then I'm going to splash again. Whenever I add texture like this, I want to make sure this remains wet so that it helps spread the design. Okay, this one down here, I want to have more of a, think of a coffee stained envelope. That's kind of what I want. So I'm going to use Van Dyke Brown and I'm going to touch a little bit of my yellow, which is Mars Yellow. So you can see this color here. It's kind of dark, a little more yellow, I think. Now I don't want it this dark because if I was to do it that dark, you see how dark it is? I want it a little lighter than that. So I'm adding more water to my brush. Again, starting in the center here. Just giving it some puddles, some water to play with. Pick up a little more color around the stamp especially. Just water now. Let's smooth this out. You can see the difference from this one to the one on top. There's a big difference in color, which is great. Gonna splash. And this splashes, you should see the texture a little bit more because of course it's a darker color, so we'll be able to play a little longer with that. Again, along that stamp, I want to add some little dark edges. I like that area over there. I like that this one kind of fades away, but I am going to reinforce that fold mark. Let's add some darker marks in here. I'm not trying to get anything that looks like something. I am just trying to add texture to the paper to dirty it up, think of more grungy. I like to do a lot of this in the first layer because I think that it gets more grounded, it soaks in a little better and gives me a little more texture, which I like. Now we're on to this big one here while these are drying. I think I'm going to do a pink envelope and a green flower. I think that would look nice. So I've got Alonia's Strawberry Velvet here. That's what's on my palette. And you can see that it kind of makes a pinkish color. It's more like a mauve-y kind of color. It is more on the dirty side. So if you have a bright red, what you'll want to do is touch just the littlest bit of green. That's the complement, which is across the color palette. I'm not adding any French gray or anything. This is just the tone of it, and I really love that. I am going to go around the flower, so I have to be a little more careful here. By dotting, see that I get different texture than if I just go straight like this. See that it kind of washes away my texture, so I'm always coming in and dotting everything. Kind of watching this to make sure that it doesn't dry too much, right? Because I am going around an object here and I'm taking a little more time than the other ones. So just keep an eye on that if you're wanting to add texture with splashing. I'm going to splash down here. It's drying quickly. Okay, while this is still wet, I'm going to come next to this flower, add a shadow next to this stamp, just like I've done the other ones. And you can see it's dissipating already, which is just what I want. So that is 3 of them so far with just one coat, and you can see how textural they are. You can see by adding wet on wet how much different techniques I've got on here, right? The splashing, the little dotting, the adding the little extra shadows in here, the creating the shadows here on the pink one. But yet they all started the same, and I want you to see that there's totally different. So imagine all the different colors starting in a different area. On this one up here, I want to come in like I've added a coffee stain. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to mix my Van Dyke Brown, a touch of orange because I want a little more orange coffee, not so brown. If you have a circle template like this, you could actually trace it on there. I'm just going to kind of hold it in place. Let's see, let's do this one. That's good. And now I'm going to mess it up. I do not want it so pretty. Remember, this is just a mess. It's been blotted on paper. Let's add some heavier areas. I'm going to touch in a little brown just to give it a couple different layers of color here. I'm going to splash that as well. Then I just take a paper towel and kind of blot. Where it goes over the seam there, I'm going to touch just a little like it ran along the seam. I'm going to add some of that color here just under the stamp, kind of just to tie it in another place. Splash. That one's going to dry. On this one down here, I like this little mottled edge right there. So let's see if we can just darken it just a little bit here. Just smeared it around with my finger full of water here just to soften it out. All right, I like that darkness it added. The pink one's still pretty damp, so what I'm going to do is just come in with a little stronger pink, and then I'm going to add some dark brown to it just to dull it even more, and I'm going to add some shadows here. Okay, let's talk stamps. Stamps can be anything that you want them to be. So mine usually have some kind of nature in there. So think of a butterfly, a leaf, a pear, anything that you can find out in nature, a feather. So if you are someone who, let's say you quilt a lot, or you do another hobby, let's say beading or something like that, that doesn't mean you can't put like a sewing spool of thread in here, or thread in a needle, or make it look like a quilt patch. Doesn't mean that you can't put some beads, maybe a piece of jewelry up here, right? I want you to make these your own. That is the fun about doing something like this, is they become your own little idea. So for this top one up here, because I want to keep it fairly light, I'm going to do a butterfly. Okay, I'm going to touch a little bit of brown. We're just going to let it dry, making sure the brown doesn't spread too far. There we go. All right, this one down here, I think I want a pear. I want something with color. So let's do a greenish pear, I think. Maybe a couple of pears. Okay, gonna let that be enough for right now because we are gonna come back and we'll shade that. I'm gonna add a little bit of splash there. Okay, on this one here, I need to do the stamp first before I put the stem over it. So the stem goes like this across the stamp. So instead of working around the stem, I just want to paint whatever's there first, and then we will worry about it. Okay, I think on that one I'm going to do a leaf, just like an oak leaf. Touching a little bit of green in there. Splash. Now I'm looking where my stem is, so it comes right across there. So you see how with my brush I just kind of lifted it out. I just took my brush right across here and lifted it out. Okay, they're dried, and I'm going to add a little bit of darker browns, darker shadows up here. Kind of fixing up the way the wings look. Make them look even if I can. Let's make this body a little fuzzier and bigger. I'm going to touch just a little bit more yellow in there. Okay, the pears down here, I want to definitely shape them up, give them a little darker shadow. So this one is in front, this one I want in the back here. So I'm just mixing some green with a touch of brown. Adding just a little bit more green back here to make it a little bolder. This one now, let's get the greenery in there. I want it to be green. I want it kind of a celadon color. So let me show you here. So these are the two colors that I'm using, the yellow gray and then the green apatite. And what I'm doing here is mixing it. You can see that it's pretty, it's a nice pretty color, soft color. I'm going to add a touch of the French gray in there because I want it even softer. Making sure to go all the way to the outline here on that where I have the white of the paper. I'm overlapping just a little bit because I want everything covered. Remember, this is the shadow area over here. Okay, I'm going to touch a little more green now and a little bit of the Van Dyke brown. And I am going to splash that. I want it to kind of spread and give me more values than I've put in there. I'm going to use the yellow gray and a bit of the lunar blue to make my stem. Taking a little bit more blue. I like that blue color. I'm going to add it just here in the flower. But you see how already it's given you really nice layers of this is behind this, which is behind this. Okay, back to our little butterfly here. And I'm going to put a little frame around it. For the pear one here, what I'm going to do is take a little bit of the French gray. I'm I'm just going to see if I can fill in a little bit of the background. Leave a little white border there. That looks nice. I'm going to do the same over here on this one. I really like that. Just the opaque kind of color. Now I want you to think of the stamp. So most stamps, remember, have that little edge that goes like this, right? And then like this. And then there's the stamp. So I want to create those little bitty marks up there. And I don't want to spend a lot of time doing it. So what I'm going to do is on this one, I'm going to take a little bit of brown, a little bit of white or the French gray. And all I'm going to do is kind of lay my tip down. See that? It doesn't add a lot, but it adds enough to give it the look of a stamp. I'm going to go over that edge while I have this color. Okay, I'm going to do the same with this one. I'm going to use that same color. I like that color and I think it'll show up just fine here. I'm twisting my paper so I keep my hand out of it. So it adds a nice little dotted edge to it. And this one here, I want to add the blue. A little more dark blue to the stem here. And because it was pink, I'm going to add the pink with just a little touch of brown. Now we're going to add a little bit of shading to this. So I want this piece here because I want you to see how fat it is, right? If I was to watch my hand here as it lays down on my hand, see the darkness of that ball? And then can you see the shading? See the line here on my hand? Let me grab a piece of paper. See that? See the shadow there? That's exactly what I want. So I want to make sure that I get it nice and dark. When you are doing shadows, do not be afraid to put them down in a darker color. So I'm going to use this red and a touch of green, just a little touch. Do you see what that did to the shape? It actually lifted it off the page a little, and that's exactly what we wanted. I like that color. I'm just reinforcing the little form there. And I am going to splash that shadow just to soften it in a couple areas. So there you have 3 pieces of ordinary paper that are now quite extraordinary because we've personalized them, we've added a lot of texture, and you can keep building with this. So I want you to think of here, if you wanted to add another piece of paper behind it, you could. You could add something coming out over here. You could add another one of these flowers coming down here or sticking up here. You see what it does? The more elements you add, the more it becomes your own because it's things that you are thinking of now. What can I add? What can I do? You know, you could add writing in there. You can add postmarks. That's what I forgot too. This one has a lot of postmarks, which I really, really loved. So for that, postmarks are usually black, but I usually go off whatever darker color I used on my piece is what I make the postmarks as well. So this one I know I used the Van Dyke brown. So I'm going to just take the Van Dyke brown. again, another layer. Isn't that cool? It's just a way to make it something of your own. You know, if you wanted a piece of the address, put your address or put your last name. You can write in here. Every stamp has something written on it. You could write it whatever you wanted there. I just want you to have fun and make it your own. I hope this gave you an insight into making the ordinary extraordinary. Let me show you one at a time. So that was the light French gray one. This one was the Van Dyke brown, a little bit of orange. Looks pretty. And then here's the pink one. It didn't take a lot of time to create 3 different images, but imagine this now filling your journal pages and adding to the layers of what you already have going on. It is a great backdrop to build upon, and I hope that you are inspired to give this a try in your sketchbook and see what kind of beauty you can create that represents you and your style. If you were inspired by today's ordinary art, please give me a like or a comment. If you haven't subscribed, please click the button. And as always, thanks for watching.